A busy downtown street in a well-to-do neighborhood is alive with activity, the hum of cars weaving through traffic, pedestrians walking briskly to their destinations, and the sun casting a warm glow over the city. The day is like any other, yet beneath the surface lies an undercurrent of racial tension. The stark contrast between the gleaming, polished buildings and the diverse faces walking the streets speaks volumes about the disparities that exist in this part of town. A black man, around 30 years old, walks confidently down the street, his briefcase in hand. Dressed in smart, casual clothes, he seems like just another professional on his way to a meeting. Yet there's something about the way he carries himself that hints at a lifetime of navigating a world that doesn't always see him for what he is. Today, he's on his way to an important job interview that could change the course of his life. His strides are purposeful, and although he appears composed, there's a quiet determination in his eyes that reveals the weight of his past struggles. As he moves forward, he is unaware of the scrutiny he's under. A white police officer patrolling the area notices the black man walking. The officer's eyes narrow as he watches the man with suspicion. Every detail seems to be under examination. The man's clothes, the briefcase he carries, his stride, the way he moves through the street. The officer, who has been patrolling this area for a while, knows the neighborhood well. To him, the black man doesn't seem to fit in. The officer's instincts tell him that something isn't right, but there's no real reason for his suspicion. The man has done nothing wrong. Yet the officer's gut feeling tells him otherwise. He begins to follow the black man discreetly, his footsteps silent as he keeps a safe distance, watching every move. The man, who is unaware of the officer's presence, walks with purpose, occasionally checking his phone as he prepares for the interview ahead. The officer's mind starts to race, fueled by years of ingrained bias. He's seen countless young black men walking through affluent neighborhoods, and more often than not, they're not supposed to be there. In his mind, the man walking ahead seems out of place, an anomaly in an area that's supposed to be for people like him. His thoughts begin to cloud his judgment, and he starts assuming that the black man may be up to something illicit. After all, people like him don't belong in places like this, do they? As the officer keeps his distance, he watches the black man more closely. He notices that the man's movements are calm, controlled, too controlled. There's something about the way he walks that feels too deliberate, too calculated. It reinforces the officer's belief that the man is hiding something, that he's somehow out of place. The officer's gut reaction tells him the man is up to no good, but he has no real evidence to back up his suspicion. Still, the officer's mind begins to form a narrative that the man might be part of some scheme, and the impulse to act grows stronger with every passing moment. The officer continues to follow the man, his thoughts spiraling into assumptions based on race and appearance. The black man, simply trying to get to his meeting, remains unaware of the dangerous assumptions now being made about him. This silent tension builds, setting the stage for the inevitable clash between the two. The conflict isn't just about this moment. It's about the deeper societal biases and prejudices that shape how people perceive and interact with one another. The black man is about to encounter an unfair system that sees him through a lens of suspicion, simply because of the color of his skin. Little does he know, however, that the story is about to take a turn, one that will force both the officer and the community to question their assumptions and confront the injustices they've long accepted as normal. The black man in his early 30s has spent most of his life fighting for opportunities that should have been available to him from the start. He comes from a humble background, growing up in a neighborhood that faced its own set of challenges, including systemic poverty and limited access to quality education. Yet, despite the hurdles, he always carried a strong work ethic. From a young age, he learned that success wouldn't come easily, and if he wanted to rise above, he had to push himself harder than anyone else. After years of working menial jobs, the black man finally landed an entry-level position in a corporate environment. The journey, however, wasn't smooth. He faced constant prejudice, often being overlooked for promotions or treated with less respect than his colleagues, despite working harder and proving himself capable time and time again. He was judged by his skin color, not his skills, and each new job seemed to come with its own set of barriers. Still, he pressed on, determined not to let the world define him by his race. The discrimination was a daily weight on his shoulders, but he carried it with quiet dignity. Over the years, he climbed the ranks slowly, facing challenges that most of his peers would never even comprehend. He fought through microaggressions, dismissive comments, and the constant feeling of needing to prove himself worthy of every opportunity that came his way. His resilience became his greatest asset. Now, at this pivotal moment in his life, he finds himself walking through a prestigious area of the city, briefcase in hand, on his way to a critical meeting. It's an opportunity he's worked years to earn, one that could change the course of his career forever. This meeting is different. It could be the breakthrough he's been waiting for, the one that will prove his worth to a world that's continually tried to minimize him. As he strides down the busy street, he's focused, determined, and full of hope. Yet beneath that determination, there's a quiet fear. Fear that despite his best efforts, the prejudices he's faced for so long might once again stand in the way of his success. On the other side of the street, the police officer in his early 40s watches the black man with suspicion. The officer, a product of his upbringing, has always viewed minorities with disdain. Raised in a small, predominantly white community, he was taught that those who weren't like him were somehow less worthy of respect or trust. His views on race were never challenged, and as he entered the police force, they only became more ingrained. He sees his job as a way to maintain order, but his version of order is one shaped by stereotypes and prejudices. He believes that minorities, particularly black men, are inherently suspicious and prone to criminal behavior. Throughout his career, the officer's biases have only deepened. He has arrested countless black men and women, often for minor infractions, or based on little to no real evidence. His actions have been allowed to slide, unchallenged by the system that empowers him, reinforcing his belief that his gut instincts, rooted in prejudice, are justified. He's never been held accountable for his behavior, which has only emboldened him. He feels a sense of power in his uniform, a power that allows him to operate with impunity. He believes that people like the black man walking in front of him are out of place in a neighborhood like this, and that the only way to restore order is to maintain control, to keep people like him in check. This officer's view of the world is one of division, of us versus them. He sees his role not as one of protection, but of policing based on a perception that people who don't fit into his narrow view of society are inherently dangerous. Every black man he sees is a potential threat, regardless of their actual behavior. And on this sunny afternoon, as he watches the black man walking down the street, the officer's mind begins to swirl with suspicion. He starts to follow the man, not out of any real evidence, but because in his mind, this black man in this affluent area simply doesn't belong. To the officer, every movement is suspect, every glance a potential crime in the making. His judgment is already clouded by his biases, and without knowing it, he is about to set in motion a chain of events that will force him to confront his own prejudices. The black man, still unaware of the officer's presence, continues on his path, his mind focused solely on the upcoming meeting. He doesn't know that the very thing he's worked his whole life for is about to be overshadowed by a series of prejudicial assumptions that could derail everything he's worked for. Little does he know, this simple walk down the street will soon become a test of character, not just for him, but for everyone involved. The officer approaches the black man with an air of aggression, his eyes narrowing as he steps closer. He doesn't even bother with a greeting. Instead, he demands, "Where are you going, and why are you here?" His voice is harsh, and his tone suggests that he already has a preconceived idea of who this man is and why he doesn't belong in this part of town. The black man, still calm and composed despite the situation, responds politely, explaining that he's on his way to a job interview. His words are measured, respectful, trying his best to de-escalate the tension. But the officer isn't listening. He presses further, his questions growing more accusatory, implying that someone like the black man, someone with his background, has no business being in such an affluent neighborhood. "You think people like you belong here?" The officer sneers, his words dripping with contempt. The black man remains steady, refusing to let the officer's hostility provoke him. He states again that he is on his way to an important meeting, hoping that this will end the questioning. But the officer isn't done. With a condescending smirk, he demands the black man's identification, insinuating that the man's presence in this neighborhood is suspicious, his mere existence in this area enough to be deemed out of place. The black man offers his ID without protest, but the officer's tone grows more aggressive. "You think just anyone can walk around here," he sneers, as if the black man's very presence is an affront to the neighborhood's status. The officer insists on checking the man's identification again, treating the black man like a criminal before he's even done anything wrong. His voice grows louder, drawing attention from the few people around, many of whom are white, and who begin to watch the interaction with mild curiosity. With no clear cause, the officer escalates the situation, his prejudices clouding his judgment. He declares that the black man is under arrest for loitering and suspicious behavior. The black man tries to explain once more, but the officer isn't listening. His mind is already made up. The officer grabs the man's arm roughly and orders him to place his hands behind his back, the handcuffs clicking shut with a loud, unforgiving sound. The black man remains calm, not wanting to make things worse, but inside his frustration is building. "You people are always causing trouble," the officer mutters, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. The crowd begins to form, and many of the white bystanders, those who see the officer's authority as unquestionable, watch with a mix of approval and indifference. The officer's words are clearly racially motivated, and his attitude reinforces the system that judges people, like the black man, based on skin color rather than character. As the officer continues to humiliate the black man in front of the growing crowd, he calls for backup, further exaggerating the situation. "This man looks like trouble," the officer announces into his radio. "You never know with people like him," he adds, implying that every black man is a potential threat, regardless of the truth. The black man, though deeply hurt by the officer's words, tries to maintain his dignity, even as his rights are trampled upon. His fate seems sealed by the officer's deep-seated prejudices, and the crowd looks on, some in silent approval, others in discomfort, but all too passive to intervene. Meanwhile, across the street, the mayor's daughter, a young woman in her 20s, is struggling to change a flat tire on her car. She's alone, trying to manage the heavy wheel when she notices the car beginning to roll downhill toward the street. Panic sets in as the car gathers speed, heading directly for the busy street. The young woman scrambles, trying to stop the car, but the momentum is too much for her to handle alone. She yells for help, but no one is close enough to assist her. It is in this moment of danger that the black man, still standing handcuffed, notices the car rolling towards the mayor's daughter. His instincts kick in, and in a split second, he gathers all his strength and rushes towards the car. Despite the officer's continued verbal attacks, he dives in front of the car, stopping it just inches from the young woman. The force of the car's momentum knocks him to the ground, and he feels a sharp pain shoot through his body. But he has saved her. His quick reflexes and selflessness have prevented a catastrophe. But the officer, still consumed by his racial prejudices, doesn't see the heroism in the act. Instead, he assumes that the black man is trying to escape, that this is just another excuse for him to flee from the scene. The officer continues to shout, calling the man dangerous and making racially charged remarks, oblivious to the fact that he has just witnessed an act of heroism, an act that has saved the mayor's daughter from potential harm. The black man, injured but resolute, stays on the ground as the officer's focus remains on his own biased narrative. The scene is a bitter reminder of how racism can cloud the truth, even in the face of undeniable actions. The mayor's daughter, still shaken but physically unharmed, slowly gets to her feet. Her heart races from the close call, but a wave of realization washes over her as she sees the man who just saved her life lying on the ground, handcuffed and injured. She stands still for a moment, processing the situation, then takes a step toward him, her eyes widening in disbelief. She walks cautiously, her gaze flicking from the man to the officer who stands nearby, still holding his radio. Her mind is racing. The man she's been told is a threat, the one who is being unfairly treated and accused, is the very same person who just pulled her from certain harm. Her eyes lock onto the officer's, and she speaks with a clarity that cuts through the confusion of the moment. "This man just saved my life," she says, her voice strong, but laced with a mix of anger and disbelief. The officer turns toward her, clearly confused, his brow furrowing as he looks from the black man to her, not understanding what she means. The officer's arrogance remains in place, his biased view of the situation seemingly unchanged. The mayor's daughter steps closer, refusing to be silenced by the officer's confusion. "I am the mayor's daughter," she continues, "and this man is a hero. He saved me from being hit by that car, and he deserves respect, not handcuffs." The officer falters for a moment, his smug expression slipping into one of embarrassment, but he quickly tries to backtrack, stammering out weak excuses. I didn't know," he mutters, clearly grasping for any justification for his actions. But the damage is done. The truth is clear, and the officer's earlier assumptions crumble in the face of it. The bystanders, who had been silently watching the whole ordeal, begin to murmur among themselves. Several of the officer's colleagues, who have now gathered at the scene, exchange uncomfortable glances. One of them steps forward, looking between the officer and the man on the ground, clearly shaken by what they have just witnessed. "Maybe we should take a step back here," the colleague says quietly, his tone laced with uncertainty. The discomfort in the air is palpable, as more people begin to realize the gravity of the officer's mistake. The officer, now visibly flustered, tries to maintain his composure, but his earlier confidence has vanished. The mayor's daughter's words have shattered his carefully constructed narrative, exposing him for what he truly is: a man who has allowed his prejudices to cloud his judgment, even when faced with a moment of heroism. He looks at the man he just tried to arrest, now aware of the irony that he was wrong, but it's too late to take it all back. The crowd, which had previously been silent in its acceptance of the officer's authority, now begins to shift. Some offer apologies to the black man, while others look down in shame, realizing they too had been complicit in allowing such injustice to unfold. At that moment, the officer's grip on power weakens. His colleagues are no longer so sure of his actions, and the mayor's daughter's declaration reverberates through the crowd, cutting through the oppressive air of racial bias. The black man, still on the ground, watches the scene unfold, his calm demeanor unwavering even in the face of such injustice. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's actions completely turned the tide? Where do you stand on the issue of racial prejudice and accountability in law enforcement? Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is, as we reflect on how one act of heroism can shatter bias and change lives. The mayor's daughter, now fully aware of the grave injustice that has just unfolded, immediately contacts her father. Her voice shakes with a mixture of fear and urgency as she explains the situation. Within minutes, the mayor arrives at the scene, his expression one of shock as he surveys the crowd and takes in the full extent of what has happened. He walks over to the officer who is standing by, still trying to defend his actions, but clearly flustered. The mayor's daughter steps aside, letting her father take charge. Without hesitation, the mayor orders the officer's immediate removal from duty. His voice is firm, and there's no room for negotiation. The officer, who moments ago had been so sure of himself, is now caught off guard as the mayor's authority cuts through the tension. The officer tries to speak, but the mayor silences him with a single gesture. "The city will not tolerate this behavior," the mayor declares, his tone resolute. "You're suspended effective immediately, and I will be requesting a full investigation into your history of racially charged behavior. This is unacceptable, and the city will not stand by while one of its officers perpetuates such injustice." As the officer is led away, the crowd begins to disperse, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others muttering words of approval at the mayor's swift action. The mayor turns to the black man, who is still recovering from the ordeal, his hands trembling slightly from the earlier stress. "You've been wronged today," the mayor says, his voice softening, "and for that I am deeply sorry." The mayor's apology is genuine, and there's a look of humility in his eyes as he reaches out to shake the man's hand. "Thank you for your quick thinking. You saved my daughter's life today." The black man nods, accepting the apology, but his expression remains stoic. He's used to being overlooked, dismissed, and misunderstood, but today he's been seen as a hero. It's a bittersweet victory, one that came at a high price. However, the mayor's words resonate deeply with him. In the days that follow, the mayor's office works tirelessly to ensure that justice is served. The black man is released from custody, and the mayor personally checks in on him, offering compensation for the injury he sustained during the incident. He's also invited to speak at an upcoming community event, where he'll address police misconduct, systemic racism, and the importance of breaking down the barriers that have long divided communities. Meanwhile, the office's future is uncertain. The mayor demands a full review of the department's policies surrounding racial bias and community relations. The officer faces disciplinary action, which includes mandatory racial sensitivity training. The possibility of losing his job looms large, and the officer, once confident in his unchecked authority, is now left to reflect on the consequences of his actions. The black man's life begins to shift, too. What started as a terrifying moment of injustice has transformed into an opportunity for him to speak out and advocate for change. He no longer sees himself as merely a victim of the system, but as a catalyst for that very system's transformation. His actions that day saved a life, but they have also sparked a conversation that is long overdue. With the mayor's office supporting him, the black man now has a platform to share his story and fight for a more just society. The officer's downfall, though painful, has revealed the cracks in the system that must be addressed if real progress is to be made. In the end, this incident becomes a turning point, not just for the black man, but for the city as a whole. It's a reminder that the fight against racial bias and injustice is ongoing, and that accountability must be at its core. The city, once divided by racial tensions and systemic bias, begins to change in the wake of the black man's heroic actions. The community rallies around him, embracing the idea that justice and equality are not just ideals to aspire to, but principles that must be fought for and upheld every day. People from all walks of life, young and old, black and white, stand together, united in their desire to see real change. The mayor, having learned from this painful experience, makes it his mission to spearhead reform within the local police department. He publicly acknowledges the need for systemic change and commits to revising policies that have long perpetuated racial bias. His office begins to roll out new initiatives aimed at building trust and improving relationships between law enforcement and the public. For the black man, life takes a dramatic turn for the better. What was once a moment of intense humiliation and racial injustice becomes the catalyst for a brighter future. With the mayor's support, doors that were once closed now open. He is offered new opportunities, job offers, invitations to speak at community events, and a platform to advocate for the changes he knows are needed. The black man's resilience and courage become a beacon of hope, not just for his community, but for others who are still fighting against the prejudices that divide them. He refuses to let his past define him, instead choosing to use his story as a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. One evening, standing before a large crowd at a community gathering, the black man addresses those who have come to hear his story. His words are not just about his personal experience, but about the broader issues of injustice and inequality that continue to plague society. He speaks about his belief in truth, justice, and fairness, values that have guided him throughout his life. With passion and conviction, he explains how one act of racism, fueled by ignorance and prejudice, sparked a chain reaction that ultimately led to positive change in his community. He acknowledges the pain of the past, but focuses on the hope of the future. "I used to think that a single act of courage could never make a difference," he says, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I've learned that one act, one stand for what's right, can rewrite 1,000 wrongs. It can start a ripple that transforms a community. And that's what we need now, More courage, more action, more truth. The crowd listens intently, their faces filled with admiration and respect. For many, this is a pivotal moment in their lives, a turning point where they realize that standing for justice isn't just a moral imperative, it's a collective responsibility. The black man finishes his speech, and the room falls silent for a moment before the crowd erupts in applause. In that moment, he knows that his fight has just begun. But it is a fight he is no longer facing alone. The community stands with him, ready to build a future where justice and equality are not just ideals, but a reality for all. Final line. One act of courage can rewrite 1,000 wrongs. It's time we all stand for justice.